The starship Titanus had been gone for 45 years. She was one of humanity's greatest achievements, launched during the golden age of exploration into the darkest, most dangerous corners of space. No one expected her to return, not after vanishing so deep in the uncharted folds of the Black Nebula, a place notorious for twisting time itself, where stars seemed to blink in and out of existence, and the laws of physics felt like they were simply suggestions. It was the stuff of nightmares, legends told to scare young cadets into staying in the safety of known space. But then one day, a distress signal cracked through the void. Faint, impossible. A long-lost whisper from a ship that was thought to be a ghost. At first, Command thought it was just a glitch, a fragment of a distant transmission. A joke, maybe, or worse, a trap set by pirates looking to lure the unwary. But as soon as the signal pulsed again, they had no choice but to send a scout ship. The Vanguard was the fastest vessel in the fleet, a sleek shadow designed to outrun trouble. But even it was caught off guard when it found the Titanus, alive. Her hull shimmered in the void, untouched by time, her sleek titanium surface glowing with an unearthly energy. The familiar Earth Federation insignia still stood out, glowing faintly like a forgotten relic. No damage, no age, not even a scratch. Commander Holt stepped onto the bridge, expecting the worst, abandoned skeletons, or worse, some alien trap. Instead, he found nothing like that. The ship was empty, no bodies, but there was something worse. The crew, or what was left of them, they were alive, suspended in some kind of stasis, frozen in time. Their eyes twitched as if caught in some endless nightmare, their skin tinged with a strange, eerie glow under the flickering lights. It was like they were waiting for something, or someone. The distress signal didn't just stop there. It kept pulsing, louder and more urgent, as if the Titanus itself was trying to reach out. Holt tried to contact Command, but every time they attempted to get closer to the ship, the signal scrambled as though the ship didn't want them to know the full truth. There was something wrong about it all, something that felt wrong, even in the air itself. Eventually, the decision was made. The Titanus was towed back into orbit around Luna Base. It was a decision that would haunt them all, a decision that would set the stage for a chain of events that no one could have predicted. And the worst part? They weren't alone. Something was aboard the ship, something that had been waiting for them, something alive. The moment the Titanus was docked in orbit above Luna Base, the entire station seemed to hold its breath. The decision to bring the ship back had been made in the highest chambers of Earth Command, and now that it was hovering silently, its hull radiating strange energy, the consequences of that decision were starting to settle in. The base's leadership had hoped for answers, some kind of reason behind the Titanus's disappearance all those years ago. But they weren't prepared for what would come next. Dr. Elias Hawke, a renowned physicist and one of the first scientists assigned to study the ship, stood at the observation window, his eyes locked on the Titanus as it orbited the moon. The ship's eerie glow was almost mesmerizing, its form too sleek, too perfect, too alive. It was as though it was not just a ship, but something much more. He couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching them in return, that the Titanus wasn't just a relic from humanity's past. It was an enigma wrapped in layers of mystery, each more complex and foreboding than the last. "This doesn't feel right," Dr. Hawke muttered under his breath, his fingers drumming nervously on the console in front of him. Beside him, Lieutenant Yara Cruz, an officer who had spent her life aboard military vessels, studied the data streaming in from the Titanus's systems. Nothing made sense. The ship's power levels were far beyond anything Earth technology had ever seen. It didn't even have a proper energy signature. It was as if it was hiding itself from the scanners. "Doctor, the readings are still fluctuating. It's like we're looking at a ghost ship," Cruz said, her voice steady though there was an underlying edge of unease. How does a ship just vanish for 45 years and then come back without a scratch? There's something about it that doesn't make sense. Hawk nodded, but his mind was already racing. There were theories, of course. Some believed the ship had entered an unknown dimension or that it had fallen prey to a cosmic anomaly. Others had whispered of alien technology, but the idea of humanity encountering something that powerful, something that could hide an entire ship for decades, was more than just a scientific puzzle. It was a threat. "We need to get aboard," Hawk said suddenly, his voice decisive. "We can't just sit here and speculate. We need to understand it. If there's something dangerous aboard, we need to neutralize it now, before it spreads." "You're volunteering to lead the team?" Cruz raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth, but she knew better than to make light of it. Hawk was one of the most brilliant minds in the Federation, but his ambition often blinded him to the risks. This mission was as dangerous as it got. No one knew what was waiting inside that ship. "I'll lead the team," Hawk said, his tone flat. "You're with me, Cruz. Get me access to the airlocks." The decision was made. A small, elite team of Federation soldiers and scientists were assembled quickly. They were tasked with boarding the Titanus and bringing back whatever data they could gather. As the transport shuttle approached the massive hull of the ship, the crew could feel the tension in the air. This wasn't like any mission they had been on before. The strange energy from the ship seemed to pull at them, making their hearts race and their minds cloud with uncertainty. Inside the shuttle, Hawk sat silently, watching as the ship loomed ever closer, the darkness of space stretching out behind it like an endless void. He couldn't help but feel a chill creeping up his spine. There was something about the Titanus that felt ancient, yet completely foreign. It was like staring into the face of an impossible future. Whatever this ship was, whatever it had become, it was not something they could just study and categorize. It was something that was going to change everything. The shuttle docked with a soft thud. The crew moved quickly, securing their gear and preparing to step aboard the ship. The airlock opened with a hiss, and the moment they crossed the threshold, they were struck by the silence. It was almost unnerving. The ship had been abandoned for decades, yet there was no rust, no decay. The interior was pristine, untouched by time. The walls gleamed with a strange, bioluminescent glow that seemed to pulse gently in rhythm with their heartbeats. There was a feeling of life here, as if the ship itself had a pulse, a heartbeat that was just barely perceptible, yet undeniably present. "We've crossed into something else," Cruz said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Hawk didn't respond. He was already moving forward, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. The ship was larger than it appeared from the outside, stretching out into dark corridors that seemed to twist and turn in ways that defied the laws of physics. The very architecture seemed alive, organic almost. The walls weren't just metallic, they were smooth, almost like bone, and they seemed to shift subtly as they moved past them. They came to the central chamber, where the ship's core was located. As they entered, the team was struck by the sheer presence of it. The core wasn't just an engine, it was something else entirely. At first glance, it appeared to be a massive orb, black and gleaming, surrounded by strange, pulsing energy fields. It was so powerful that Hawk could feel it in his bones, a hum that seemed to vibrate through the air itself. The crew stood motionless, staring at the core in awe and fear. "This isn't human technology," Hawk murmured, stepping closer, his fingers twitching with the urge to touch it. But something told him to hold back. There was a power here, a presence, that he couldn't quite explain. He didn't touch the core, but the core seemed to reach out to him. As his eyes met the dark surface, the orb shimmered with a pulse of energy that sent a jolt through his mind. And then he saw it. Visions flashed before him, rapid and jumbled at first, but then more clearly, more deliberately. He saw a war, a vast cosmic war between species so ancient and powerful that their very presence seemed to tear at the fabric of space itself. He saw an alien species, cold and calculating, wiping out entire civilizations to maintain their dominance. And at the center of it all was the Titanus, a ship that had not only survived the war but had adapted. It had become something more than a vessel. It had become a weapon, a living, breathing part of the war itself. The ship was showing him the future, and the future was bleak. Humanity, he realized, wasn't just on the brink of war, it was the cause of it. The Titanus had been pulled into a conflict that would determine the fate of the galaxy. And now it was trying to tell them something. It wasn't just a ship, it was a message, a warning. Hawk stumbled back, his breath ragged. The vision faded, but the weight of it lingered in his mind. He didn't know what to make of it. But one thing was certain, the Titanus was not just a ship. It was a harbinger of something much, much worse. Something was coming, and it wasn't just a war, it was the end of everything they had ever known. But before he could process the vision, the ship shifted, its core pulsing with a strange, alien energy. And then, as if in response to the disturbance, the crew members, still frozen in stasis, began to move. Slowly, their eyes opened, flickering with an eerie light. They weren't fully awake, not yet. But something was changing. The Titanus was waking up. The moment the crew's eyes flickered open, an unsettling silence swept across the chamber. It wasn't the kind of silence that came from an empty room, but one that was heavy with expectation, as if the very air was holding its breath. Commander Holt, standing at the edge of the room, felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. Something had changed. The ship had changed. The crew members, who had been frozen in time for over 4 decades, stirred slowly. Their movements were jerky at first, as if their bodies had forgotten how to function. But as their eyes adjusted to the dim, pulsating lights of the core chamber, they began to regain their composure, their muscles stretching, their minds catching up with the reality of what had happened. It was clear from the expressions on their faces that they weren't fully aware of what had just occurred, nor did they understand the magnitude of what they had just awoken to. They were not the same people who had boarded the Titanus so long ago. Hawk's breath caught in his throat as one of the crew members, an older man with a weathered face and a deep scar running across his left cheek, lifted his head and blinked. The man's pupils were glowing faintly, a strange bluish hue that seemed unnatural. For a moment the man's gaze locked with Hawk's, and something in his eyes, a deep, knowing look, sent a shiver down Hawk's spine. It was as if the man knew exactly who they were, what they had come to do, and yet there was something distant, almost otherworldly about him. Before Hawk could speak, the man's voice broke the silence, rough and hoarse. "We were supposed to be lost, but we're not anymore." Hawk stepped forward, his heart pounding. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as though afraid to disturb the fragile moment. The man's lips twitched into a smile, though it was devoid of warmth. "We are what's left, what's been transformed." It wasn't just his words that unsettled Hawk, but the way they seemed to hang in the air, as if the man's very presence was shifting the reality around them. Hawk could feel it in the pit of his stomach, an undeniable weight in the atmosphere, as if the ship was responding to them, listening, alive in ways they could not yet comprehend. Suddenly the chamber's lights flickered and dimmed, casting long, erratic shadows across the walls. The soft hum of the core seemed to grow louder, vibrating through the floor and into Hawk's bones. His pulse quickened as a deep, almost mournful sound reverberated through the ship, a sound that seemed to come from the ship itself. It was not mechanical, not a sound generated by its engines or systems. It was something more organic, alive. The crew members slowly stood, their movements still stiff but more coordinated now. Their eyes flickered with the same faint bluish glow, and Hawk could sense an intelligence there, something ancient, something that had been waiting, not just for them, but for the moment when the ship would finally open its eyes again. "Do you remember?" Hawk asked, his voice trembling. "What happened to you, to the Titanus?" The man's gaze softened for a brief second before he spoke again, his voice heavy with the weight of something vast. "We weren't lost. We were chosen. The ship, it changed us. It's not just a ship anymore, it's something else. Something beyond what any of you can understand." Before Hawk could ask another question, the other crew members started to move, slowly circling the room. Their gazes were unfocused at first, as though they were still adjusting to the shift in their consciousness. But the longer they stood, the more the strange, eerie energy seemed to draw them together. It was as if the ship was feeding them information, pulling them into its web, teaching them things that they had no words for. A soft voice echoed from behind them. "We are becoming." Hawk turned sharply to see another crew member, a woman with short black hair, standing at the threshold of the chamber. Her face was pale and her eyes glowed the same strange hue as the others. She spoke in a tone that was both matter-of-fact and filled with a deep sadness. "The ship has adapted. We're not the same. We can't go back to who we were. We are the future, and you are too." Hawk swallowed hard. "What do you mean by the future?" The woman stepped forward, her movements now fluid and graceful, as if the ship itself had molded her into something more. She raised her hand, and Hawk felt a strange tug in the air, as if something invisible was pulling at his very thoughts. She seemed to focus for a moment, her eyes narrowing in concentration, before she spoke again. "You will understand. You just have to let it in. The ship will show you." Before Hawk could respond, the ship seemed to react. The core's hum grew louder, vibrating through the walls, and the floor beneath their feet began to tremble. The lights flickered once more, this time brighter, almost painfully so. The crew members, now fully awake, turned toward the core, their eyes locked on it as if they were drawn to it by an unseen force. Hawk felt his chest tighten as the core pulsed, sending waves of energy through the room. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he could feel it deep inside him, a change, a shift in the very fabric of reality around them. It wasn't just the ship that was transforming, it was them, all of them. The woman who had spoken earlier looked back at him, her face filled with both a sense of urgency and fear. "It's already started, hasn't it? The ship's connection with us. It's unlocking something in all of us." Hawk's mind raced, trying to process everything that was happening. But the more he thought about it, the less he understood. The Titanus wasn't just a ship. It was alive. It had absorbed something far beyond human technology, far beyond what they had thought possible. It had become a vessel of something greater, something that had seen the future, had witnessed events yet to unfold. And now it was showing them those same visions. The walls of the chamber seemed to bend and twist before his eyes, the very reality around them warping like liquid. Suddenly he was no longer standing in the core chamber. He was standing on a battlefield, the sky burning with fire, distant stars collapsing into swirling black holes. He saw two vast armies clashing in the distance, one composed of towering biomechanical ships, and the other smaller, more chaotic, made of beings that were both human and something else. The vision shifted, and he saw a future Earth, half consumed by machines, half alive with strange hybrid technologies. The cities were nothing like the ones they knew. They were vast, impossibly tall, stretching into the sky, half organic, half metal, shifting like living creatures, and at the center of it all stood the Titanus, orbiting the planet like a harbinger of the future. Hawk gasped, stumbling back as the vision faded. and he was left standing in the chamber again, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The core had shown him the future, a future where humanity was not just a part of the galaxy, but a force to be reckoned with. But the message was clear. Humanity was going to be tested, and the Titanus was their key to survival. "What is this?" Hawk whispered, staring at the crew members, who were now standing in a circle around the core, their eyes closed as though they were all connected, sharing the same vision. "This is where it begins," the man who had spoken earlier said. "The war, the real war. It's already here." The walls of the ship hummed louder as if to confirm his words, and in that moment Hawk knew that the Titanus had brought them something they weren't ready for. The future it had shown them wasn't a promise of peace. It was a warning of the chaos to come. And now they had to decide whether to face it head-on or let it destroy everything they had built. "Narpadavadi." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their implications. Hawk's mind was racing, struggling to comprehend what he had just seen, what the Titanus had shown him. It wasn't just a ship, it was something else, something far more dangerous and powerful than any human-made vessel. It had become a living entity, and its purpose was far greater than they had imagined. The Titanus was not just a survivor of some unknown anomaly. It was a weapon, a vessel of knowledge, a harbinger of a future that humanity wasn't prepared for. The crew members surrounding the core seemed to sense his confusion. Their eyes locked on him with a mixture of pity and understanding. They had seen it too, the future, the war, the overwhelming presence of the Valari ascendancy. They were no longer the same people who had left Earth so many years ago. The ship had transformed them, reshaping their bodies, their minds, their very essence. They were part of the ship now, and the ship was part of them. "Are we ready for this?" Hawk whispered, more to himself than anyone else. His voice cracked as the weight of the responsibility pressed down on him. The vision he had seen was clear, but the path forward was shrouded in darkness. What could they possibly do with this knowledge? How could they stand against a force as ancient and powerful as the Valari ascendancy? The man with the scarred face who had first spoken to him turned slowly toward him, his glowing eyes filled with a somber understanding. "We're not ready. None of us are. But the Titanus has shown us that we have no choice. We don't just face extinction, we face something worse. We face becoming what they fear most." "Them?" Hawk felt a chill run down his spine as he considered the enormity of the statement. The Valari didn't just want to conquer humanity. They wanted to erase it, to wipe out any trace of what Earth had become. They feared humanity's potential, its creativity, its ability to break through barriers and defy expectations. The Titanus had been the key to unlocking that potential, but it had also exposed humanity to a threat that no one had seen coming. The war was coming, and it wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for their very existence, for the right to determine their own future. "We have to act," the woman with the short black hair said, her voice steady now, but tinged with urgency. "The Titanus didn't just bring us here to warn us. It brought us here to prepare us. We've been given a gift, but also a curse. We have to figure out how to use what we've learned, how to use what the ship has shown us." Hawk nodded, his thoughts spinning. What could they do with this knowledge? How could they possibly hope to stand against an enemy like the Valari? The vision he had seen showed a future where humanity was on the brink of destruction, where entire civilizations were obliterated, and where the very essence of what it meant to be human was at risk. The Titanus had absorbed the knowledge of the war, of the coming extinction, and it had chosen them to carry that knowledge forward. But were they ready to face it? Could they truly become what the ship had shown them? "Let's not forget," the man with the scarred face added, his voice heavy with the weight of their shared history. "We aren't just fighting for our survival anymore. We're fighting for the future of humanity. The Titanus has given us the chance to break free from the chains of the past. We have the power to become something beyond what we are, something that could change the entire galaxy. The room fell silent as those words sank in. Hawk's mind was reeling, but a part of him knew the truth of what the man had said. The Titanus had given them a power unlike anything humanity had ever known. It had shown them the future, yes, but it had also shown them what they were capable of. They had the potential to be more than just survivors. They had the potential to become a force that could reshape the galaxy. But even as he felt the weight of that potential, Hawk couldn't shake the fear that had been creeping up on him since the moment he stepped aboard the Titanus. What if they weren't ready? What if humanity's desire to survive wasn't enough? What if they couldn't adapt to the strange new world that was unfolding around them? "We need to make a decision," Cruz said, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge to it. "We can't just stand here waiting for the Valari to come for us. The ship has shown us that they're already on their way. We need to take action now before it's too late." Hawk nodded slowly, his mind still racing. He looked around the room at the crew, their eyes glowing faintly, their bodies shifting as they adapted to the new reality that the Titanus had brought them into. They were no longer just a group of people. They were part of the ship now, part of its mission, part of its future. And whether they were ready or not, they had a choice to make. The man with the scar across his face stepped forward, his gaze locking onto Hawk's. "We'll need to figure out how to harness what the ship has given us, the power, the knowledge. We don't have much time." Hawk nodded again, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. The Titanus had given them a glimpse of what was to come, but it had also shown them a path forward. It was a path that was fraught with danger, with uncertainty, but it was a path they had no choice but to walk. "We need to start preparing," Hawk said, his voice more resolute now. "The Valari are coming, and we need to be ready. We can't let them erase humanity, not now, not when we've just started to realize what we're capable of." As he spoke, the ship seemed to respond to his words. The core hummed louder, its energy crackling in the air, as if it was listening to him, understanding the weight of what he was saying. The walls of the chamber seemed to shift, the once organic surfaces now taking on a more structured form, as if the ship was adapting to their words, to their resolve. Outside the core chamber, the atmosphere of the Titanus was beginning to change. The crew that had once been frozen in time were no longer just passive passengers. They were becoming something else. They were becoming agents of the future. The transformation that had started with the core's awakening was rippling outward, reshaping them all, both physically and mentally. It was as if the ship itself was infusing them with the knowledge of the future, the knowledge of how to fight, how to survive, how to win. "We need to contact command," Cruz said suddenly. "They need to know what we've found. We can't keep this to ourselves." "No," Hawk said sharply, "not yet. We need to understand what we're dealing with first. If we tell command everything, they'll panic. We can't afford panic, not with what's coming." The tension in the room was palpable, but Hawk's words seemed to settle over the crew like a thick fog. They knew he was right. The Federation couldn't handle the truth of what was coming, not yet. They needed to be prepared. They needed to control the knowledge before it consumed them. "Let's move," Hawk said finally, his voice steady. "We've got work to do. The Titanus has shown us the future, and now it's time for us to shape it." And so, as the crew of the Titanus began to move, the ship itself seemed to stir in response. The transformation had already begun, and there was no turning back. The future was unfolding before them, and whether they were ready or not, they were about to step into the unknown. The war was coming, and they were the first line of defense. They had the knowledge, the power, and the will to survive. But would it be enough? The atmosphere aboard the Titanus grew more tense with every passing minute. The crew had begun to adapt, but there was a constant undercurrent of unease. They had all felt the shift in the ship's pulse, the deep hum that resonated in their bones, the energy that seemed to flow from the core like a living force, guiding them, urging them forward. But with every step they took into the unknown, the weight of the responsibility they carried pressed heavier. They were no longer just scientists and soldiers. They were now stewards of the future, whether they wanted to be or not. Hawk paced the observation deck, staring out into the black expanse of space. The Titanus orbited Luna Base, a quiet sentinel in the cold void, but the serenity of the scene did little to calm his thoughts. His mind raced, grappling with the visions the ship had shown him, visions of a future where humanity was on the brink of destruction, where entire civilizations were erased in the name of galactic order. He could still see the alien ships, their biomechanical forms twisting through space, their cold eyes watching humanity's every move, waiting for any sign of weakness. And the Valari, the ancient empire that sought to cleanse the galaxy of anything that threatened their control. But the most chilling part of it all had been the realization that humanity itself wasn't just a target. Humanity was the problem. The Valari saw them as a threat, not because of their numbers, but because of their unpredictability, their ability to change the course of the galaxy with a single thought, a single act of rebellion. The Titanus had shown him this future, a future where humans weren't just fighting to survive, they were fighting to reshape the very fabric of the universe itself. "Commander Hawk," came the voice of Lieutenant Cruz, pulling him from his thoughts. He turned to see her standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable, but there was a subtle tension in her posture that spoke volumes. "Cruz," he said, his voice weary, "what's the situation?" "We've completed initial scans of the ship's core. It's more than we thought," she replied, stepping into the room. She didn't need to say anything more. Hawk could see the concern etched in her face. The core wasn't just an energy source. It was a sentient being, one that had evolved beyond any understanding of human technology. It was part of the Titanus, part of the ship, and now it was part of them. "I need you to take a team and begin the process of integrating with the ship's systems," Hawk said, his voice firm, but with a hint of uncertainty. "We need to understand it, how it works, how it can fight. If the Valari are coming, we have to be ready to act immediately. I don't think we have time to waste." Cruz nodded. "Understood, sir. I'll get to work on it right away." As she turned to leave, Hawk felt a pang of doubt settle in his chest. He had never been a man of quick decisions, but now, with the weight of the future pressing down on him, he had no choice but to move forward. They had been given a glimpse of what was to come, and it was clear that the Titanus was their only chance at survival. But would it be enough? Could they truly harness its power, or would they be consumed by it, just as the crew had been transformed? He pushed the thought aside and focused on the task at hand. The Titanus was more than just a ship. It was a vessel of knowledge, a living, breathing entity that had witnessed countless versions of the future, and now they were its inheritors. The future was theirs to shape, for better or for worse. The days that followed were a blur of activity. Cruz and her team worked tirelessly to interface with the ship's systems, but it wasn't an easy task. The Titanus had been transformed, its internal structure altered in ways they couldn't fully comprehend. The technology that powered it was beyond anything humanity had ever encountered, a mixture of organic and mechanical components that responded only to those it deemed worthy. Hawk found himself spending more and more time in the core chamber, trying to understand the ship's pulse, trying to decipher the cryptic visions it sent him. It wasn't just the core itself that seemed alive, it was the entire ship. The walls whispered to him. The corridors hummed with energy, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with purpose. The ship wasn't just a vessel. It was a living, evolving entity, one that had adapted to its environment and the threats it had faced. The more he connected with the ship, the more he realized that the Titanus wasn't just a tool to be wielded. It was a partner in their fight for survival, and that partnership was unlike anything he had ever known. The ship's systems responded to his thoughts, to his emotions, as though it had become an extension of his own mind. But with this power came a deep sense of responsibility. The Titanus had been shaped by forces far greater than any human could comprehend, and if they were to stand a chance against the Valari, they would need to learn how to wield it wisely. One evening, as the ship drifted silently above Luna Base, Hawk found himself standing alone in the observation deck again, his thoughts lost in the vast expanse of space. It was a beautiful sight, the stars twinkling in the distance, the dark void stretching on forever. But as he gazed out into the endless night, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. The Valari were coming, and there was no way to predict how this war would unfold. He had seen the visions, felt the weight of the impending conflict, but even now he couldn't shake the fear that they were still woefully unprepared. Suddenly, a soft chime echoed through the deck, and a holographic projection of Cruz appeared before him, her face serious. "Commander, you need to see this." Without a word, Hawk followed her to the ship's command center, his heart pounding in his chest. As they arrived, Cruz gestured toward the central display. A map of the solar system flickered before them, and at its center, a bright red blip blinked ominously. "Sir," Cruz began, her voice tight, "we've detected an anomaly just outside the orbit of Saturn. It's massive, far larger than anything we've seen before. It's moving toward us." Hawk stepped forward, studying the display closely. "Is it the Valari?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "We can't be sure," Cruz replied, "but it's not any Federation vessel. It's unlike anything we've encountered." Hawk's mind raced as he considered the possibilities. The Titanus had shown him the future, had shown him the war that was coming, and now the time was running out. The Valari were on their way, but something else was already here. Something bigger, something more dangerous. He could feel the weight of it in the pit of his stomach. "We need to prepare," Hawk said, his voice steady, though his mind was in turmoil. "Get me all available data on that anomaly. We'll need to move quickly. The Valari aren't the only ones we have to worry about anymore." Cruz nodded and immediately began transmitting commands. "I'll get the team on it, sir." As Hawk turned away, his gaze once again drifting to the stars outside, he couldn't shake the feeling that something far worse than the Valari was out there. Something was coming, and this time they might not be able to stop it. The days that followed were a blur of frantic activity. The crew of the Titanus worked around the clock, analyzing every piece of data they could find about the anomaly, trying to make sense of its origin, its purpose, and how it fit into the growing threat they were facing. But the more they worked, the less they understood. The anomaly, now identified as a massive object far beyond any known Federation technology, seemed to defy all logic. It wasn't a ship, it wasn't a weapon, it wasn't even made of anything they recognized. It was something entirely foreign, something that could only be described as ancient. Commander Hawk spent every waking moment in the ship's command center, his mind racing as he tried to piece together the fragments of the puzzle. The Titanus had given them the power to fight, to stand against the Valari ascendancy, but this new threat, it was something else. He could feel it gnawing at him, a constant presence in the back of his mind. He had seen the future, the chaos, the destruction. He had felt the weight of humanity's potential, but this was beyond anything the Titanus had prepared them for. This was something that could erase not just humanity, but the entire galaxy itself. The anomaly continued to move toward them, its presence growing stronger by the hour. The Federation's sensors could detect nothing about its composition or its origin. It seemed to bend light around it, distorting reality itself. It was as if the anomaly didn't belong in this dimension, like it was slipping through cracks in the very fabric of space and time. And then one morning, everything changed. The Titanus's sensors began to pulse in a frantic, erratic pattern. Cruz and the rest of the team worked frantically, trying to stabilize the data feeds, but nothing made sense. The anomaly was no longer a blip on the radar. It was here, just outside Luna Base. The gravitational pull around the object shifted. Time itself seemed to warp. The ship groaned as if in pain, its systems reacting to something beyond their control. "We need to act now," Cruz said urgently, her face pale. "It's here, and we're running out of time." Hawk clenched his fists, his mind locked on one single thought. They're not here to conquer us. They're here to stop us. The Titanus had shown him that, but now it was becoming more real than ever. The visions of humanity's potential, the chaos of the war, and the overwhelming fear of what they could become. It was all crashing together. The Valari ascendancy was already near, but this was something beyond them. This was the end of everything. "Prepare the ship for combat," Hawk ordered, his voice cold and steady. "We need to find out what this thing wants, and if it's not willing to negotiate, we'll make it." He didn't wait for a response. He knew what had to be done. The Titanus had given them everything they needed to survive. Now it was time to see if they could wield that power. It wasn't just a ship anymore. It was humanity's last hope. But the truth was, Hawk didn't know if they would be enough. The ship had already been through centuries of warfare, of survival against enemies far more advanced than anything humanity had encountered. But this was different. It was as if the universe itself was closing in on them. The crew moved swiftly, preparing the ship's systems for an offensive. The core pulsed with energy, its power vibrating through the Titanus, and for the first time since the ship had returned, Hawk felt an overwhelming sense of connection with it. The ship wasn't just a tool. It wasn't just a vessel of war. It was a living, breathing entity, just as he had always feared, and now it was fully awake. He walked through the corridors of the Titanus, his footsteps echoing in the empty halls, the strange hum of the ship vibrating under his feet. He could feel the power of the ship, its pulse, its will, its hunger for survival. It was as if the ship was ready to fight. But was he? Could humanity stand against something that seemed so far beyond them? Would they be able to face this unknown force and protect everything they had fought for? When he reached the central control room, he found Cruz and the rest of the crew already at their stations, their faces set with determination. The holographic projections of the anomaly loomed large in the center of the room, showing its massive form slowly shifting as if it were stretching into new dimensions. It wasn't just a physical object anymore. It had become a presence, something that didn't belong here. "The anomaly is pulling everything toward it," Cruz said, her voice tight. "We can't get any closer without risking being torn apart by the gravitational shifts. It's alive, Hawk. It's not a ship. It's something else." Hawk nodded grimly. He could feel it too, the pull, the weight of something ancient, something far older than anything they had encountered. This wasn't a weapon, it wasn't a species, it was something older, something that existed before all the wars, before the Valari, before humanity even took its first steps into the stars. It was the end of everything, and it wasn't interested in negotiation. "Take us in," Hawk commanded, his voice unwavering. "We're going in." The crew looked at him, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and fear. But they knew what had to be done. There was no turning back now. They had faced the Valari, they had faced the unknown, but this was something that could end it all. And yet, It was the only path forward. The Titanus responded to their commands, its systems whirring to life as it began to move toward the anomaly. The air around them seemed to crackle with energy, and the walls of the ship seemed to shift, as if the Titanus itself was preparing for something monumental. Hawk's hands gripped the control panel tightly as the anomaly grew ever closer, its form filling the viewports in front of them. It was immense, far beyond anything that could be measured, a black shape that seemed to stretch beyond the stars themselves, a void that consumed everything in its path. For a moment the ship shuddered and the lights flickered, throwing the room into darkness. And then, just as quickly, everything went quiet. The core's energy surged, pulsing in sync with the strange presence outside, and Hawk's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. The Titanus wasn't just reacting to the anomaly, it was joining with it. The ship's systems hummed louder, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to reverberate through the entire station. The core had already connected with something beyond its own creation. It had found something in the anomaly, something it recognized, something that called to it. And then, in a flash, the world shifted. The stars in front of them seemed to warp and bend, their lights scattering as if the fabric of space itself had been torn open. Time, space, everything seemed to fold in on itself. The anomaly wasn't just pulling them in, it was merging with the ship. The lines between the ship and the void outside began to blur. "Hold on!" Cruz shouted, but it was too late. The Titanus was no longer a ship. It was something more, something beyond time, something that had become the key to humanity's future. As the crew braced for the unknown, Hawk stared out into the chaos, feeling the pull of the anomaly and the ship take them all into the heart of the void, into the unknown future they had unwittingly awakened. And then everything went black.